Hey class. All right, so now we're in the second half of the course of the semester, and now we're going to deal with a little bit more of the in-depth critical thinking necessary in order to kind of really understand how social media operates behind the scenes. Not so much of what it does to us as a person, but how it does things to us in a quantized place, a place in which we have been turned into part of the system. Social media is free for the most part. It is something that we access and communicate through, but it has these offset costs that we don't really think about because we take for granted all the things we get from it. Information, connection, community, learning, the ability to share. All of these things are net benefits to us as users, but as users, we've been converted from people to users. So today we're going to talk a little bit about what that means, and we're going to focus on a couple of different really strong points of view that I respect and believe are really good ways of critically analyzing where we are and how we are as people inside of the social media world. We're now about 15, 16 years into social media as a really constant construct, and we call them big tech. But they're not really big tech because they're part of a utility that we use but aren't regulated the way that utilities are. So first and foremost, social media are a set of different platforms that utilize something known as platform capitalism in order to operate. And platform capitalism means they convert you into the product because it's free, but they have costs that are very necessary for them to pay. And the costs they have to pay are server fees more than anything else. Server fees are the ability to keep your data and your storage for very long term. That's the term, the cloud, that we hear so often. The cloud is just a nice, calm term for something really bad. Huge holes in the earth. The cloud are huge server farms that are all over the planet, mostly in the Arctic Circle and away from fault lines, obviously to keep them from shaking. But why do you think they're in the Arctic Circle? Because servers are hot, hard drives get heated up, so if you keep them in a part of the earth that's already cool, then you have to be away from fault lines and they're already cool. But they're very expensive to manage. Then they have to pay for the electricity that gets them all the way to you, and the pipes. The most important part about the internet is that what we don't realize is most of it is underwater. Most of it runs on huge cables all across the earth. The majority of the internet is cables that are spanning all over the planet. It's faster to send something from here to Europe, being on the East Coast, than it is to send something from here to Arizona because it goes overland instead of underland. A lot of times when we send something across to the West Coast, it actually goes through the water, around, and then to the West Coast because that's the faster throughput. But none of this is free. But yet you get to use it for free because you believe that there's some sort of benefit that you're getting from these things. So today we're going to talk about surveillance capitalism and algorithms. So I told you we'd return to algorithms and how we'd end up in the situation where we're going to talk about what does quantization mean? What does it mean when we convert some types of human behavior into ways that it can be analyzed by machines? It's a very complex discussion that is actually well beyond what we would do in an intro survey class on social media. So I'm going to try to keep it brief and try to give you the overhaul on what you need to know about how you interact with algorithms. And you really have two homework assignments, one discussion, one assignment. The assignment's fairly brief. The discussion I think is pretty important. I think fairly fun. So I think you're going to have some fun with it. I don't know. I always think these things are kind of fun just to think about as thought experiments. The other thing I'll give you at the end of this is the details in the midterm. I've gotten through about half of by the time of this recording, I've gotten through about half of your proposals at this point, and I love them. I mean, so far through the ones I've seen, 100%. Like I think the articles you've picked are really important. So I'll post the rubric of the midterm. That's due in 2 weeks, okay? So you should start working on that. So first, I want to talk to you about this, and I hope this doesn't go too long, but I want to talk to you about what an algorithm is and where it collects data from. So an algorithm is a compilation of your user experience and your user behavior. The way it does it is it combines two really important things. One, the collection of your history of everything you've ever done on the internet. This is done through cookies. Cookies are left from every single site. They're put on your computer and they track you from site to site to site to site. Two, it compares you to everyone else who's similar. So it takes other people's extant data and makes a prediction. That's what an algorithm is. It's a predictive technology that makes a prediction about what you may choose next. So it takes and customizes advertising, feed experiments, posts. So if you're dealing with algorithmic feeds such as Facebook or Twitter, it's organizing the feed based on what your experiences are combined with other people with similar experiences. So that's what an algorithm does. It's a predictive technology. But this is where people like Shoshana Zuboff, who you're going to read for homework tonight, fear we're leading toward more of a surveillance capitalism beyond platform capitalism structure, which is your ability to fight for your rights for your own future. Her fear is that when we start becoming used to the idea that this data predicts our futures, are we choosing our path, or are the machines leading us to a specific path? Those are the type of vagaries that kind of like could keep you up really late at night. And if you're post-pandemic, that'll be like the 2 a.m. talks you have, which is not about free will, because we all have free will and agency. We do, no matter what. But more along the lines of maybe the minor choices that we're making in life, how much of that is influenced by the machine's algorithmic tendencies and how much of that is just us doing it? And then are they separable? So I wrote a paper quite some time ago about how we could have a media literacy about algorithms. And my approach was that media literacy and algorithms don't stop at a computer and a screen. So the reason why I had you do the tetrads experiment is to understand how media environments themselves exist as environmental. And environmental means it isn't just a screen-based world. So here's something you may or may not know, and I probably brought this up once or twice before, is that your data is collected off-screen just as much as it's collected on screen. If you have a local frequent buyer card, let's say Walgreens or Stop and Shop, and when you go in those places and you scan it or you put that number in so you get those discounts, your phone number is tied to your Facebook account. This is usually done through two-step verification, or you've given the phone number at some point or another. There are ways to find out what data Facebook is keeping about you, and odds are it has your phone number. Many times your phone number is so long-term that it's probably sort of public on these things. So in other words, when you're shopping, when you're in a store and you make a purchase with your credit card or a frequent buyer card, that data gets accumulated directly into Facebook's ad algorithms and Google's. So they're tracking you no matter where you are. That's surveillance. Surveillance itself is the ability for somebody out there, someone unseen to you, is keeping tabs on what you are. Now, it's not surveillance in the sense of like control, which is the Foucauldian sense of what surveillance is. In Foucault's idea is that surveillance is a sort of way of controlling us. It's all power and power being taken from us. In surveillance capitalism, it goes a step less, but a step sideways. That it's not controlling us, but so much as selling us, ourselves, back to ourselves. So it's kind of like this feedback loop that's being generated by your human behavior in physical spaces. But oftentimes we don't really understand how these things even operate. So I'll give you an anecdote. An anecdote is Facebook at this current moment can now predict with an 85% certainty of someone getting engaged in 2 weeks. How does it do that? It's fairly simple when you think about it. It looks at user data and their searches. What are you searching for? Are you searching for rings? Are you searching for honeymoons? Then it finds your partner and finds out if the partner is searching for similar things. And then it tries to figure out what type of ways other people who have been engaged have interacted with similar products. By combining other people's searches and the searches that you're currently doing and your partner are currently doing, it can make a prediction of a temporal time of when you will be making a big move in your life. Those types of things are left outside of our sphere of understanding, and we don't think of them as predicting our future because we likely would have done it anyway. But you'll likely see certain ads slowly change to your very specific circumstances. All of you have seen an ad that's just entirely too coincidental. Oftentimes you'll blame it on, oh my gosh, the machines are listening to me. Some of them are, but they're not listening in the way you think they are. They're not listening in terms of full capture of data. They're more listening to keywords and behavior than they are listening to the idea or substance of your text. So if you're having a conversation, likely it doesn't give a shit what you're talking about. What it cares about is the keywords, product words, and actions. So if you're turning on let's say Google owns Nest, which is the thermostat, and you're always turning the temperature higher, it's going to sell that data and assume you need sweaters or be warm. If you are talking to Alexa about certain products, Amazon knows how to customize your feeds. It's that type of data that's recycled through it. Amazon isn't always on mic, as is Siri. That's why you could call to them and ask them questions at any point, because they're listening at all times. But it's all algorithmic data. Now here's where it gets a little weird. You're going to see a piece today at the TED Talk, which kind of goes into the algorithms of oppression, because algorithms aren't fair. They're imbued with the creator's knowledge. How creators create algorithms is really what algorithms operate as. Here's a darker story. In 2015, Facebook created like this year-end celebration post, which basically took your most interacted post of the year and showed it to you at the end of the year. And what it did was, oh, this is your post that did the best. Unfortunately for a programmer, the post that did the best that year was unfortunately about his daughter that had passed away. And that was the post that resurfaced at the end of the year celebration with balloons and likes around it. Sounds horrific. So he contacted Facebook, and Facebook actually got back to him and apologized and discontinued the algorithm object that created those things. And what was understood at that point was that algorithms come from the creator's perspective. Because people who work at Facebook are likely much more privileged than we may be, their lives are far different, and so their best related posts aren't really what we think of as our best related posts. So they don't think outside that box. That's a very small microcosm of just how algorithms operate. They operate as a mirror to the writer of the algorithm, the coder themselves. And if it's only people who have created them, who work only in Silicon Valley, and people who only are there, you're getting a version of reality that is given to you from their privileged perspective rather than the public's privileged perspective or public's perspective in general. And we don't think about that too often because for the most part it works in our benefit. But it is oppression and oppressive because the most part it's monocultural in terms of it's mostly men who write algorithms. It's mostly white people that write them. And the machine has created a system where it's very much a certain specific way of ignoring how other people of color, black people, brown people, and Asian folk, and everybody are left out or excluded from the way that the systems are working. This leaves out, of course, disabled people of any kind, that the systems of the internet are pretty ableist in general. They expect you to be able to see and hear without thinking about how you do that. So these systems are fairly monocultural, and yet we interact them as if they're for everybody. But we don't really understand that because it is what Bruno Latour would call a black box. And a black box means that it's something opaque. We're not supposed to see it. To date, YouTube has never told anyone how their algorithm operates. Facebook occasionally lets things go, and they've only done so because Cambridge Analytica was such a scandal that they had to tell people about certain things. So this all said, that type of oppression means that algorithms are also being instituted at scale at different places than we're used to. So what I mean is that sometimes when we're given health benefits or housing benefits, because we can't deal with as many people at once, as they outsource that to a machine, and the machine decides who gets what and how. But they have somebody to compare it to. Just like your algorithm compares your personal history to somebody else's personal history and predicts a future, that is not scalable to every person. So it oppresses those who are outside the system. It is not a one-fits-all type of system. I want to just read you real quick about what Shoshana Zuboff talks about. So you're not reading this whole book. You're going to read an older article from her, which is still very good. This is her Age of Surveillance Capitalism book, which is bigger, or actually it's about the same size as pointing at it, where is it? Right there. Marshall McLuhan book. She writes here at the beginning this interesting quote. So I wrote a book on this subject in 2015, and it just came out again in 2020 about how to use the web. It was like a media literacy book for that. And I prefaced the text by saying, remember, if you do not pay for it, you are the product. It's kind of an aphorism of the internet, which is that if it's free, nothing's free. Always keep that in mind. Nothing is free. There's always some sort of loss somewhere. I want to read this to you from her introduction. Surveillance capitalism products and services are not the objects of a value exchange. They do not establish constructive producer-consumer reciprocities. We are not surveillance capitalism's customers. Although the saying tells us, if it's free, then you are the product, that is also incorrect. We are the sources of surveillance capitalism's crucial surplus, the objects of a technologically advanced and increasingly inescapable raw material extraction operation. Surveillance capitalism's actual customers are the enterprise that trade in its markets for future behavior. That's really an important takeaway from this. And my favorite chapter from this book happens about halfway through. If you do happen to read this book, you only need to read parts 1 and 2. Part 3 is kind of like her proposal for a future. It's really, I think, a readaptation of another paper that she was doing. But in the middle of part 2, she talks about the right to your own future. And she relates in the type of ways that people write a book or a story or make a project. When you write a book or a story, you have to picture the end. You have to create the entire thing. Sort of like when I write a course, I have to know where we're going. That gives me the rights to my future. That gives me the rights to how this all works. That's why you get a syllabus. You can see how the future is going to unfold. You may interact with it in real time, but the way it works is sort of laid out because you have the rights to that future. You kind of have a way to plan it. But in her words is that platforms itself, in their predictive technology, take away our rights to their future and sort of predict their version on us or project a version of our reality onto us, which we have to participate because technically there's no outside. In other words, there's no outside to YouTube or Google. When you think of something or you can't think of something, you're thinking of an actor's name and you can't remember it, your mind doesn't default to, oh, I don't care, I don't know. Your mind defaults, I'll just Google it. That means your literal being is knowledgeable of social media and algorithms as part of your being. That means the rights to your future are already outsourced to a tech company. So that's her fears for that. And that's something that I think going forward we need to be very, very concerned about, because if we're unaware of how these systems operate, we continue to allow them to operate the way they do without concern as to what we should be knowledgeable of. So for homework, you have 2 really, really short assignments. Okay, so one is the discussion board, which I think is going to be fun. So there's a film you're going to watch. It's a 6-episode series. You only have to watch episodes 1 and 2. You can keep going if you'd like. And it's from the film Do Not Track. It's a customized documentary. You do have to interact with it. They talk about cookies, they talk about tracking software, they talk about how days go by and what it is. So it's kind of like a summation of what I just did, but in a film type of way, and you're going to interact with it. That type of thing is, I think, a really fun experiment in order to see how browsers themselves take things. I'm not sure if I mentioned this previously, but the word data is from Latin datum, which means to give. And so we give all the time. Capta is the Greek term for the same thing, and that means to take. So their systems, social media systems, work on a capta-based system, and we work on a data-based system. We give to that system, and it's for free. We give away our data. What I want you to do for the discussion board is I'm going to give a series of questions. You don't have to answer them all. And inside those questions, you could respond to them. You could respond to my questions, or you could respond to somebody else's post, just like we did with a few weeks ago. So one way or another, you have to make at least one post on your discussion board. The question first is, does this lecture plus that film change your behavior? Now that you're aware of how these things track you, are you going to change your behavior? Why or why not? Doesn't mean you have to, by the way. Did you continue the series? Did you like it? Does this change the way that you see internet technologies? Do you care? I mean, it's possible that, we're too far into this. Maybe you just don't it doesn't matter. And are customized experiences, such as customized ads, are they important to you? Do you like customized ads? Have you ever seen an ad that is very customized that you're just like, well, thank you, Instagram. That's actually exactly what I want, and I had no idea. So is it possible that some of the times this results in a good experience? These are all open-ended, and you may answer any way you'd like. For the short assignment, very, very short, it's called Opening the Black Box. So the question is more of an advice to the world. For the assignment, it's your opinion, and you're going to give me an example or two of how do we open the black box? How do we learn more about it? From your perspective as a student, How do you think that we should go about learning more about algorithms? This is truly an opinion piece. You can't really get this one wrong. But I want to know from your perspective of what you've learned from the readings this week, from what you've watched. This is after you've watched the TED Talk, read Shoshana Zuboff, and played with the Do Not Track film. I want to know the black box question. After you do all of those, I want to know how you believe we can move forward or learn more about how these things operate. How do we stop this predatory behavior? And does it matter? Those are the questions for that. And finally, the midterm. Okay, so the midterm is going to be a rubric. You're going to see an assignment appear on your on the blackboard, and it's due in 2 weeks. And it's an analysis of the article that you proposed. And really, it's going to be a media literacy example. So it's, I think I've already premised this, and most of you have actually abstracted this in your response to this piece, which is how are you going to tell other people about it? How do you convert what you've learned into colloquial layman language that somebody else could say, thank you, I learned a lot from that. I really appreciate it. So that's actually sort of helpful for you to become the teacher so you could help other people become more aware. This should be a black box. Our class should not be a black box. It shouldn't be stuck inside of here. It should be shareable and learnable, and we should democratize this type of education so it's more accessible to people outside of our little spaces. So that's going to be something else I'll add on there. So, all this said, there's more to come because next week it gets a little bit darker. We're going to go into what are the dark results of some of these algorithms, and we'll get there next week. So for this one, I think this is just more about you learning to become more aware of these systems at play that often have little to do with us, but have a lot to do with how we act. So until next time, as usual, stay healthy, stay well, and stay curious.